بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا من فضلك علما وتعليما وعملا وفقها في الدين يا رب العالمين. Alhamdulillah, this is lesson 3 of module 4, covering the fard ayn, the individually obligatory knowledge that every single Muslim, male or female, must know regarding tahara, purification. And purification, as we noted, it is the key, the miftah for salat, for the prayer. It's also the key for other things, such as touching the mushaf and so on. And in our previous session, we were talking about, after reviewing the different types of water that can be used and cannot be used for purification, we then started talking about wudu itself. And inshallah, we're going to do a little bit of review of that and then go into the new material concerning the ghusl and the tayammum, the dry wudu, and then wiping over casts and bandages and things like that. And then next week we finish a few other issues of tahara. I anticipate we have 2 more classes to wrap everything up, inshallah, for tahara. So we want to review what breaks wudu, what breaks ghusl, and the obligations of wudu and the sunan of wudu. So without having to repeat everything we covered last week, we just want to be familiar with the basic things that break our wudu and the things that obligate the full ritual bath called the ghusl. So breaking wudu, they say, ما يخرج من أحد السبيلين, whatever comes or exits from one of the 2 openings. So that's fairly straightforward. Number 2 is filth that flows from other than the 2 openings, such as blood or pus. Someone last week asked about things like pimples, and that's not really what we're talking about here. We're talking about like large quantities, think of boils, things like that, infections and the like, things that burst like that, not tiny little marks that have things like that. That is under the surface is not impure, like a bruise is blood. But if that were to be cut somehow and the blood flowed on the limb, you would have to make wudu from that. But if it's still underneath the surface as a bruise, then you're fine. Number 3, vomiting, a mouthful or more. 4, sleeping in a position such that the buttocks are not firmly planted onto the ground, such as while lying down or leaning on one side. So let's say you're in the masjid and you're leaning on one of the pillars and you're just relaxing and you start dozing off like this. Does that break your wudu? Okay, what if you get really tired and you decide, you know what, this pillar is not comfortable enough, I'm going to lie down, and then you go to sleep. Does that break your wudu? Yes. Is it that the sleep is what's breaking your wudu? No, it's not. The sleep itself is not what's breaking your wudu. It is that when you go to sleep, it is most probable that you're going to break your wudu through the ordinary means, right? So sleeping in that manner would break the wudu. Yes?
What if you're not sleeping on your back or on the side, but you're snoring? Doesn't matter?
If you're leaning, then you're fine. Because the sleep itself isn't what breaks the wudu. It's being in such a comfortable position that your body relaxes to the point where you could easily break your wudu and you'd have no idea whatsoever. Just leaning, even if you're dozing off and it's somewhat heavy, you should be fine. Now, you should probably make wudu from that as a precaution, because this is not an agreed upon position. Some suggest that yes, that would break the wudu if it's heavy. And they distinguish between heavy and light based on your awareness. If you had something in your hand like a phone or a sibha and you dropped it because you were in that kind of sleep and it startled you, that would be seen as a deeper sleep. But if you wouldn't drop it and you're still aware of it in your hand, but you're dozing, you're not in such a deep sleep that they would say make wudu over again. Loss of consciousness, again, it goes back to the sleep issue, right? When you lose consciousness, it's likely that you're breaking your wudu. Insanity, drunkenness, and unique within the school of Imam Abu Hanifa, laughing out loud by an adult while in salat. This is unique to the school of Imam Abu Hanifa. It's not found in the other schools, and one shouldn't be doing that anyway. But in his school, if you do that in salat and you're an adult, your wudu is broken, you have to go make wudu and start the prayer over again. Now someone said, what is the definition or the guideline for out loud? What does that mean? And generally the ulama say that out loud means you can hear yourself, right? So if you are by yourself even and you laugh and you can hear yourself, that's out loud. It's audible, jar. If it's just internal, that's not laughing. That's just you thinking of a joke or hearing something funny and you're trying to contain that laughter. So that's what breaks wudu. What about touching impurities? Does that break wudu? No. A lot of people have this misconception that touching something that is impure breaks your wudu. As long as you have wudu, if you touch something that's impure, what do you need to do? Wash it off. That's all you have to do. And when you wash it off of your body or your clothes, you're fine. You can go and pray. You don't have to go and make wudu all over again, because coming in contact with impurities does not break your ritual purity. Okay? As far as ghusl is concerned, what obligates the ghusl? The emission of sperm/sexual fluid, mani, that leaves its normal place inside the body with pleasure. This is a somewhat technical definition, and that's because when you go deeper into the fiqh, there are certain exceptions and guidelines to determining when a person would need to take the ghusl and when they would not. We'll not go into all of those details, but it's pretty basic. Number 2, intercourse. So that's with or without the emission of any sexual fluid. Number 3, the ending of the haid or nifas, the ending of the menstruation or postnatal bleeding. And lastly, someone who becomes a Muslim. When a person becomes a Muslim, one of the first things they should do is go take a ghusl. And it's not anything too technical. They just need to cover themselves with the water from head to toe, covering every area of the body, as we'll explain tonight, inshallah. Now, going to the actual act of wudu, we first talk about what is the bare minimum for an acceptable wudu, and then we talk about the sunan, the prophetic practices that one should be doing, but which, if neglected, the wudu is still valid. Right? This doesn't mean that you should only do the basic minimum of wudu. It just means that this is the minimum standard, and there's a benefit in knowing that. And this is taken from the verse in the Quran where Allah Ta'ala talks about the wudu, when He says to wash your faces and to wash the two arms up to and including the elbows, and wamsahu bi ru'usikum, and to wipe the head and to wash the 2 feet. Now, to be technical, we're looking at Arabic words like face and hand and feet and so on. There are parameters and borders for these things. So the face is defined as the top of the forehead to the bottom of the chin, lengthwise, and then widthwise from one earlobe to the other. This means this area here, from the earlobe going inward, that entire dimension is considered the face. And we noted that the scholars caution us that when we make wudu, water has to make contact with the entire face, and that includes the areas such as above our eyelids here, these creases in between our eyes, those little areas, this area of the nose, I'm not sure what you call that little area underneath. You need to make sure that water comes into contact with these areas because that's all part of the face. If a person just splashes the water and water covers 99%, but there's a few areas where it didn't touch that are dry, then the person did not wash the face completely, which means the entire wudu is invalid. So there has to be this ta'mim, that the water covers, it makes contact with every aspect of the face. The same thing with the arms. Parents, whenever your children go to make wudu, always check their elbows. And adults should check your elbows too, because a lot of people have the misunderstanding that washing to the arm, there's two misconceptions. Number one, people think washing the arm means you start from here at the wrist up to the elbow, because they don't think of the hand as a part of the arm. Right? If I say point to your arm, you would point here. You wouldn't point here to your hand. But in Arabic, the word yad encompasses the very extremity of the hand all the way up to the shoulder, technically. So Allah Ta'ala in the Quran says to wash your yad, your aydiyakum ila al-marafiq, wash your hands up to the elbow. So the hand is everything. It's just in English we say arm. So really washing the arm means washing from the hand, the tip, all the way past the elbow. Because if you stop short of the elbow, you didn't cover the entire thing. And it needs to go slightly past it. And you have to check your kids' elbows when they make wudu, because they often just go and they miss the elbows, right? Likewise, wiping a fourth of the head, that's a minimum. So what is the fourth of a head? Rubu'ur rats. They say it's about this amount of space in your forehead. So if you take that amount, and then, so basically it's that much for me. So that would be a fourth. And then another fourth, then 4/4. So wiping that as a minimum. The sunnah is to wipe the whole thing, but that's a minimum. And then washing the 2 feet up to and including the ankles. So again, you're going slightly past the ankles to make sure that water reaches the entire thing, including the heels. These 4 aspects are the fard aspects of wudu. This is the bare minimum. Now, we don't make wudu just with the bare minimum. So what's the importance of knowing the bare minimum? Well, things happen. You know, you have children that may do the bare minimum. They may skip things. They may mess things up. You may forget. You may be in some rush. And by knowing the bare minimum, you know the minimum standard by which your wudu is valid. But you shouldn't solely do the fard. You should also add in the sunnahs. The sunnahs being the 15 acts that we mentioned last week, which is basically what we do every day when we make wudu. Washing the hands to the wrist prior to wudu, that's in the context of using an ina, a kind of utensil, in the days when people would put their hand in it to use the water. If the hand was dirty or had some filth, they would wash that first and then put the hand inside. To begin with tasmiyah. What is tasmiyah? Basmala. And this means Bismillah or Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, or it could even be Alhamdulillah. You're mentioning the name of Allah when you initiate the act. The third thing, to use the siwak at the beginning. Trivia question on the siwak. What hand should you use the siwak with? Right hand? Okay. And does anyone say left hand? You say left hand? Okay. So why do you say right hand?
It just seems like everything you do, usually shaking the hand or eating, typically done with the right hand. So I assume that.
Right. So you shake the hands with someone using your right hand. Okay. But when we, in our bathroom etiquette, we don't use our right hand, do we? Right? Okay. So there's actually a difference of opinion among the fuqaha about this. Some say you use the right hand because the siwak is a blessed branch of a blessed tree praised by the Prophet ﷺ. It has virtues in using it. So you use it with the right hand. Others say no, you use it with the left hand because you are, after all, you are cleaning with it. And usually when we clean things, we're using the left hand to do so. So some say because you're cleaning, you use the left hand. So you have those scholars who say right hand, those who say left hand, and then I have to plug in Imam Malik here. Imam Malik says it depends. He says if you are cleaning your teeth, then use the left hand. But if your teeth are already clean and you're using the miswak for the sake of the sunnah, just to use it for the sake of using it, well, your teeth are already clean. So in this case, use the right hand. And I like that. That sounds really nice. It looks at the context of why you're using it. At any rate, to use it at the beginning is a sunnah. And in the Hanafi school, if you don't have the actual twig from the arak tree, you can use other things. Even if you only had your finger to use, that would still be a sunnah according to the Imam Abu Hanifa. You could use the finger, this case would be the right finger, and you would just go in between like this before rinsing the mouth. So then there's the rinsing of the mouth, and then there's the taking the water into the nostrils with 3 separate handfuls of water. We mentioned one particular etiquette last week regarding this. Who remembers that etiquette? When you take the water into your nose, what happens after that? Right, it's a good etiquette to use the other hand to press the nostrils, to conceal, and then to release. So you're not, as Imam Malik would say, acting like a donkey, and just releasing it like this. Okay, so then there's increasing the depth of taking the water into the nostrils, provided one is not fasting. So it's a sunnah that you take it further in, not just at the bottom part. To pass the fingers through the bottom of a large beard with water on the palm of the hand. So like this. What about washing the beard though in general? For men, do you have to wash underneath the beard, the skin beneath the beard when you make wudu? Because after all, the minimum is to wash the face, and the beard is covering part of that face. So do you have to go underneath to wash the skin on beneath the beard? I'm asking those with or without beards, because those without, inshallah, will have a beard, inshallah.
Okay, so I've seen most people kind of
Well, okay, let's simplify the question. Let's say you don't have a beard. You have a little 5 o'clock shadow. Do you have to wipe the skin there? Yeah, you have to wash it, either wiping it or water coming into contact with it. Okay, what if you're 16 and you're trying to grow your beard and you just have a few whiskers and you call it a beard, but it's not really a beard, right? What do you do here? Well, in the school of Imam Abu Hanifa, they distinguish between the thick beard and the non-thick beard. What's the difference? The difference is that with a thick beard, you cannot see the skin beneath it, right? Right. Just looking at the beard, you see the beard. You don't see the skin underneath it. That is a thick beard. If it's a thin stubble beard or patchy beard where you can see the skin beneath it, that's not a thick beard. So for the thick beard, you don't have to wash the skin underneath. You can simply pass the water, or you can do this, right? But if it's a thinner beard, you have to do this and just make sure the water gets underneath. So nevertheless, it's still good to have water come into contact through the beard like that. So it is what it is. To interlace the fingers, so that will be putting the fingers in between the knuckles like this as you're making wudu. To wash the limbs 3 times. and this is sunnah, and also ensures you don't miss any spot, to wipe the entire head, to wipe the ears, even if the water is the same water used for the head. So if you just do this and then go straight to the ears, that's fine. Ideally, you use fresh water, so you wipe the head, fresh water, and they describe it as the 2 index fingers and 2 thumbs in conjunction, where the index fingers are inside of the ear and the thumbs are behind the ears, just in one fluid motion like that. Wiping, to rub the limbs with water. In the school of Imam Abu Hanifa, you don't have to rub the water on the limb. As long as you have water in contact with the skin, you could literally pass your arm beneath the faucet as long as water reaches every part of the arm. However, in the school of Imam Malik, you actually have to wipe the limb, right? Whether it's with your hand or some other object with the water, you have to wipe the limb. So stricter in that regard. Nevertheless, it's still a sunnah, according to Imam Abu Hanifa and his school, to rub the limbs with water. To wash the limbs successively without pausing between them, such that in normal weather the last part would not dry before one began the next. So if you're washing your arm and then your kids are calling you, the kids are fighting, you can go and intervene, make peace, and come back and continue the wudu as long as the limb hasn't dried in the normal amount of time it would take for it to dry, which is more or less 5 minutes. So as long as it hasn't dried in normal weather, you can continue. Intention is a sunnah, and chronological order is a sunnah. And what that means is, if you were to wash your feet first, then your arms, then your head, you've mixed up the order. The wudu would still be technically valid, but you have omitted a sunnah, which is not praiseworthy, but it would still be technically valid. So these are the sunnah acts of wudu, and that's really it. Were there any questions on wudu before we go on to the ghusl and tayammum? Any questions that we didn't address?
So you can have a conversation with someone while making wudu and follow?
Right, so in the Hanafi school, if you're speaking about worldly things that doesn't involve dhikr, that is disliked. If it's involving the dhikr of Allah, that's praiseworthy. Yeah.
What about, say, like women who wear like nail polish or like
I'm really glad you asked that question. It's an important question. Nail polish, okay, let's look at it this way. Go back to our fundamentals. We said that the bare minimum of a valid wudu is that water has to make contact with the skin of what? The face, the hands up to and past the elbows, a quarter of the head minimum wiped, and the feet up to and including the ankles. Water has to make contact with every part of those limbs. If there is a substance that blocks water from reaching, then water has not reached that area. Therefore, it would be as if the person did not fully wash the limb. So the question is, does nail polish block water from reaching the limbs? And the answer is virtually all forms of nail polish block the water from reaching the fingernails. If a person had they have these so-called wudu fingernail polish stuff where apparently it colors the nails and it just creates a color without creating a blockage, or like henna, for instance. But if it's the actual nail polish that we know of, that most people use, that creates a kind of varnish or covering over the nail, that's blocking water from reaching it. And it's not just nail polish, it could be anything. It could be fake nails, it could be nail polish, it could be a glove, It could be anything that creates a barrier blocking water from fully reaching that limb. So this is important for ladies to know. Any other questions on wudu before we move on?
We have a scholar, he says, do the wudu, put the nail polish on, and let it dry. For a few days, you'll be okay to do wudu on top of it.
I'm afraid to ask the name of this person. Who? Oh, yeah, I'm not surprised. That's who I thought it was. It's, yeah, that's a whole other topic unto itself. His fatwas and his views. He shouldn't have been invited to ISNA. Anyhow, next question. Right. So here's the thing, where there's often what we call a question of fiqh and then a question of fact, right? The fiqh is fairly straightforward. Anything that prevents water from reaching would make that an invalid wudu. The question of fact is verifying, does this particular thing block water or not, right? If it's some new makeup technology or some new thing, we have to see, well, does it or does it not block water from reaching? If it blocks water from reaching, no matter what it is, it would have to be removed before the person can make wudu. If it doesn't block, then it will be like henna on the fingernails. That doesn't block. It absorbs into the fingernail and into the skin. One can make wudu and there's no problem whatsoever. So, as far as I understand it, virtually all makeup basically, if you make wudu with it, it would smear, right? Right? If it's oil based, that's okay, right? If you have oil, say you have coconut oil or olive oil on your skin absorbs that. So, as you're making wudu, and that's not going to affect the validity of the wudu. It's not blocking per se. But if it's makeup that's oil based or has other ingredients, it's still going to smear. So I'm not sure what the alternative is. I know in some of our Muslim cultures, unfortunately, what happens is the woman gets dressed up for her walima, her wedding, and she's all decked out in makeup and hair and all of this, and because it's such an elaborate process, she just prays all her prayers at the end of the evening and doesn't pray them when they're in, because to make wudu through all of that would be a huge effort and it'd have to be redone. Well, this is not how we should be doing our walimas in the first place, obviously. But, and one should not sacrifice salat for these kinds of things. Yeah? I don't know if that answers the question, but I mean, if it blocks, it has to be removed. If it's oil based and it's not blocking, one could make wudu theoretically with it on, but it's going to smear, I presume. So that becomes another issue. Yeah. Yes.
What about the permanent makeup? Micros? Can you just microflavors like is this very different?
Yeah, I'd have to look into it and see what it is, what it entails. But if it doesn't block, then the principle is that it will be fine, right? Yes.
What if a person has one on calves?
Yeah, that's going to come at the end of the class, inshallah. We're covering that as the final thing for tonight.
So it's not a question, but it's just an observation. So including this new technologies that come out, sometimes they proclaim that this is actually okay, and later on the research comes out it's not okay. So my thing, and also pertaining to Sunnah, some people say, oh, it's just Sunnah,
Right.
you don't have to follow. So I think they downplay certain things which, at least in my opinion, we should be cautious about this. We should take
Right.
this more seriously than.
Absolutely. Yeah, you make two very good points. Some new technology comes out and they say, oh, this is Islamically compliant, right? This, you can wear this and you can make wudu over it. that may or may not be true. If it's brand new, we have to verify. Verify. Don't just take people at their word just because they rubber stamped it. You want to find out for sure. Secondly, as you noted with regards to sunnahs, when we say sunnah, it doesn't mean, it's just some side voluntary thing you can do or leave as you want. In fact, to purposely neglect the sunnah is itself sinful. To purposely neglect the sunnahs of wudu or salat and so on could even render the prayer invalid in some schools, right? Purposely neglecting. The point we make in teaching the fard ayn is to distinguish between the bare minimum for it to be valid and then the ideal, so that you know, well, if I miss this, is it still valid or is it not? So that your salat is valid, right? You don't want to skip something that you shouldn't have skipped, where your wudu is invalid, and you go ahead and pray. But if you skip something by accident, or you forgot something, and then you realize, if you know that is a sunnah and not a fard, you know your wudu is still valid. That's the importance of knowing the difference between the fard and the sunnah with regards to wudu. But at the end of the day, assuming you're fully aware of what you're doing, your wudu from beginning to end encompasses the fard and the sunnahs and the adab as well, in an ideal situation where everything is done. So you come, you have intention, you say Bismillah, you wash the hand up to the wrist, and then you take in the water, then you sniff the water, then you wash the face. You do all of the steps, including the sunnahs, so that at the end you have, alhamdulillah, a very beautiful wudu, as the Prophet ﷺ mentions the wudu and the rewards for having ihsan in it. فَأَحْسَنَ الْوُضُوء, who does it well, Allah forgives their sins. Okay, so we'll move on now to the ghusl and the tayammum. These are the other two ways of purification. That's coming. Yeah, it's all coming, inshallah. So the ghusl, performing the ghusl, the three types of ghusl and tayammum. That's what we want to learn in the time that remains. So the ghusl, we talked about what obligates the ghusl. Now, how do you make the ghusl? Like the wudu, there are the basic integrals, the furud or the fara'id of the ghusl, which is basically to rinse the entire mouth once. Now, in wudu, remember, in the Hanafi school, rinsing the mouth is a sunnah, not fard. But when it comes to the ghusl, it's a fard to rinse the mouth. So you rinse the mouth once. Rinsing the entire nose once. Again, what is sunnah in wudu is actually fard in ghusl. And in the school of Imam Abu Hanifa, this distinction is made, but it's not made in the other schools necessarily. And number three, washing the entire body once, making sure water reaches every part of the body. Ta'mimul jism, ta'mimul jasad. That you make sure that water reaches every part of the body. This is essentially the bare minimum ghusl. So if a person steps into the shower, they rinse the mouth, they rinse the nose, and they just stand in the shower and they make sure that water reaches every area, they could step out and they have a ghusl, alhamdulillah. That's the bare minimum, right? But there's obviously more to it than that. And that's where we cover the sunan of ghusl. Now, before we talk about the sunnahs, we want to talk about some areas that people often miss in the ghusl that would render it incomplete. So it is obligatory for water to reach every part of the body in the ghusl. This includes the inner parts of the ears. This includes the navel. This includes the skin beneath one's beard, because now this is not wudu anymore, right? In wudu, you can just do this, right? You're fine. But in the ghusl, you have to make sure that the water is at the root. It's reaching beneath the beard. And that it's also beneath the mustache, also in the eyebrows. And you have to make sure, if you are a man and you have braids, none of you have braids, but if you ever have braids, you have to unfasten them and make sure the water reaches the root. Let's talk about that briefly, that last part. You see this picture? This is a man from, I believe this is Oman, back in the 1800s, late 1800s, early 1900s, taken by a British explorer. I can't remember his name, a very eccentric man. And you see these Bedouins, these A'rab, and they still maintain the culture, the ancient Arab culture for men of having the dhafa'ir, the braids. We even read the chapter in the Shama'il al-Muhammadiyah on what has been narrated regarding the dhafa'ir, the braids of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He wore braids. He would have two on each side with his blessed ears in between them. That's a very ancient Arab practice for men. It's not associated with imitating women. It's a very specific style for men. If someone does that as a man in a way that is not feminine, it's absolutely fine. And you see in this picture that this was an ancient custom. So it is obligatory in the ghusl for the man to undo these braids and wash the inside to the roots. He has to do this each time he takes a ghusl. He can't just leave them in and jump in the shower. He has to undo them. As much as a hassle that could be, he still has to undo them. But for women, if they have braids, however they look, no matter what form they take, if they are braids, dhafa'ir, they have a rukhsa, they have a dispensation, something that's been made easy for them as women. They are not required to undo those braids. They just need to make sure that water reaches the roots. They don't have to undo them. And this is a distinction between men and women in the ghusl, because for the women this is a dispensation, as the braids are one of the forms of adornment for women that they keep inside their homes for their husbands. So to ease the burden, she's not required to undo them. She can keep them. Okay? But for men, they have to undo them. So now you know for when you grow out and have braids. Yes?
What about something like dreads?
Yeah, good question. I'm not too certain about even the permissibility of those and whether or not water can even reach the roots with them, owing to the nature of the hair. I'm not too sure. I mean, I've heard some who allowed it, provided the water reaches the root, because it's not technically a braid. But I've also heard the other thing. I'm not too sure. Yeah. Okay, so we covered the bare minimum of the ghusl. We covered those areas that water needs to reach, like the armpits and these areas, those crevices that people might miss where water doesn't reach. When we come to the sunnah of ghusl, the actions that we should also be doing, they are the tasmiyah, saying Bismillah or Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim with the niyyah, and to begin with washing the hands up to the wrist, and to wash away any impurity if it is on the body. So if there's any najasa, one would wash that away before they begin the ghusl in earnest. And to wash the sexual organs, even if there is no noticeable impurities. Then to make wudu, the same wudu one makes for prayer. And then to pour water on the body 3 times, beginning with the head, then the right shoulder, then the left shoulder, then the lower torso and the rest of the body. And to rub the body with water and to wash successively without pausing. So basically the person is saying Bismillah, they wash the hands, they make sure there's no impurities, they wash the privates, then they make a wudu, and then after that they then make sure they cover the body entirely from the head, and then ideally from the right side, then the left side, and going downwards. And as they're doing this, a sunnah is also to rub the body. So as the water is coming down or the one is pouring it, they're also rubbing these areas. And even the hard to reach areas, it's a sunnah. And if you can't reach it, it's no problem. But it's a sunnah to rub those areas as you're passing the hands over them. Rubbing here doesn't mean anything vigorous. It just means passing the hand, where the hand or even another object is in contact with the moistened area. So let's say you want to do delk, this rubbing part of behind your shoulders. It's just a matter of doing this after it's already wet. And this is obligatory in the school of Imam Malik, but it's sunnah according to the school of Imam Abu Hanifa. That's it for the ghusl. There's other questions. A lot of your questions are going to come up in the subsequent topics. So, are there any questions on ghusl before we go forward? I think some of the questions some of you may have will actually be addressed in the other issues we'll be talking about. But any questions on the ghusl? It's fairly straightforward. It's also recommended, we don't have this problem, but it's recommended if a person is bathing, doing the ghusl in an area, say there's a tub of water, it's recommended that they wash their feet after they step out of that area. Because if there's any najasa or any filth that travels down into the body of water, it's in contact with the feet. If they step out, we don't know if they came in contact with it. It's recommended to just rinse the feet one more time. But if you're in a shower like what we have here, and it has a drain, everything is draining out already, so you don't have to really worry about that. Okay? Yes?
What about like if you were to use soap, would you have to rinse yourself off and then make ghusl? Or how would that work?
Well, this goes back to the nature of water and change, and whether the water can have another substance in it and still be purifying. If it's such a small amount of soapy water that it hasn't led to a change in the essence, you could technically use that in the ghusl according to the school of Imam Abu Hanifa, whereas in the other schools, or at least the school of Imam Malik, if any change to the smell, taste, or color were perceptible, any of the three, you would have to remove all of that before and just use plain water, because we would consider plain water to be that which has no change whatsoever. Even if it's called water still in its essence, we would say that the change of smell, taste, or color would render it pure but not purifying, right? So what do you do in this day and age? Because people are using soap and water in the shower and they also want to do the ghusl. The best way, in my opinion, is that you take the ordinary shower with the soap and water as you normally would, and then at that stage do the actual ghusl once you've rinsed yourself. Or you could do the ghusl first and then do the soap and water. Don't try to mix the two together, doing them simultaneously. It just avoids the difference of opinion. It's the stricter, safer view to not mix those two practices, so that you're not doing ghusl with soapy water, even if technically you would be okay, according to the school of Imam Abu Hanifa, provided the water essence hasn't changed substantially, right? If it's just a little bit of soap in it.
What if you make wudu after doing your right shoulder, not your left right shoulder? Does that matter to make that?
It's fine, because remember that as long as you've rinsed the mouth and brought water into the nose and covered the entire body with water, you have a valid ghusl at the bare minimum. So if you did the wudu after all of that, that will be fine, right? The issue is attaining the bare minimum, and then this is just the order that is ideal, that is considered all of these sunan that we should be doing in the ghusl. If it was mixed up in a different way, it's also fine, because like wudu, if the order is slightly off, it doesn't affect the validity as long as the purpose of the ghusl has been fulfilled. Yeah.
So do you have to be more rigorous while taking water in the nose when doing ghusl versus wudu? Or is it the same?
It's the same, that water just reaches the inside of the nose, the nostrils. It's the sunnah to make sure the water goes further up in the wudu, but the minimum standard is that it goes inside, right? It doesn't have to go all the way up to the nasal cavity or anything like that. But you want to just make sure that they take the water you know.
There is no distinction between wudu and ghusl.
Not that I know of. Yeah.
After your ghusl, when you come out the shower, if you're drying yourself off and you happen to, touch your private part by accident, do you have to leave wudu again?
Right. So, in the previous, well, we actually just covered it in the review. Because we are talking about the fiqh of tahara and salat according to the legal methodology of Imam Abu Hanifa and his students. In that madhab, a person touching the private parts, that does not break their wudu. However, in the school of Imam Malik, if it is with the surface of the hand, not the sides, it will break the wudu. Right? Okay. So on to tayammum. How many of you have performed tayammum before in your life? Right? Yeah, a good number of you have. So tayammum is what we call the dry wudu, the dry ablution. And this is also mentioned in Quran in the same verses in the same area that talks about wudu. It mentions the permissibility of using the earth as an alternative to using water in certain situations. And Allah describes this as tayammum with sa'idan tayyiba, with pure earth. And as we mentioned in the khutbah today, this practice of tayammum is something uniquely gifted to the Prophet ﷺ and this ummah, by extension, to the exclusion of previous nations. Meaning, among the previous prophets and messengers, when it came to salat, they had to use water. There was no alternative but to use water. They did not have tayammum as an option for them. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave, among the many khasa'is, the unique things gifted to the Prophet ﷺ, this tayammum as a means of purification. And he said, the earth, وَجُعِلَتُ الْأَرْضُ لِي مَسْجِدًا وَطَهُورًا. The earth has been made for me a place of prostration and a means of purification. Now tayammum is a dispensation, meaning it is allowed in place of wudu when certain conditions are fulfilled. You cannot just use tayammum whenever you feel like it. Oh, I don't feel like making wudu today. No, there's certain conditions that have to be in place. It is permissible when you have udhr shar'i, a valid sharia excuse. What are these excuses that allow for you to use the earth as a means of purification? They say, number one, being roughly 1 Hashimi mile away from water. Okay, what is a Hashimi mile? A Hashimi mile is, I guess, what we call an Arab mile. And we could insert the Arab jokes here. When the Arab says, I'll be there in 5 minutes. I have like 1 mile to go. But it's an Arab mile, so it could be shorter or longer. It all depends because we have various estimations. The Hashimi mile is quite precise in the books of fiqh. It's 1.16 miles or 1.86 kilometers. But to round that down, the fuqaha say it's about a half an hour walk with an average pace. So if you are half an hour away from water with an average pace or more, and you have no access to water in that distance, you can make tayammum. Does that mean you should? I mean, maybe walk the mile and get the water, especially if you have time. But if time is running out, especially, then you have the option of making tayammum because water is far away. This is not really an issue for us today, right? Because water is mostly accessible. But you could be in a place in the wilderness where there's no water, or you're not finding it, right? It's out there somewhere, but you can't find it, and you would have to walk a very far distance to eventually find it. You could make tayammum in that situation. Likewise, you can make tayammum in the case of extreme cold, such that a person fears a likelihood of illness or damage to a limb if water is used, and does not have access to any means of heating the water. If you have means of heating the water, you can't opt for tayammum. You can't use tayammum. You have to just heat up the water, right? But if you have no means of heating up the water and it's so cold that you are legitimately afraid you're going to get sick, not just be uncomfortable, but legitimately be sick, then you could use tayammum. Likewise, sickness would allow for tayammum. And this is the kind of sickness, it's not the sniffle or a light headache, it's not none of this stuff. It is when you fear that using water for wudu will lengthen the sickness or worsen the sickness, whether it's the wudu or ghusl, you fear it will be prolonged due to that water. Whether it is because of the water itself, you think it will worsen the sickness, or because of the effort that it entails to do the wudu, right? A person could be sick and weak, and they're afraid that if they go through the whole process of getting up and going here and moving and this and that, they're going to get worse. Then they could make tayammum, which is a lot quicker and easier. However, when we talk about sickness, it's not just left up to our subjective feelings. There's certain criteria involved. There has to be a reasonable likelihood that using water will make you get worse or prolong the sickness. How is that reasonable likeliness established? How do you know it's reasonable? You know that through a clear sign. So that could be a sign based on what you're currently experiencing in the sickness. It could be a person making wudu and they feel in the moment they're getting worse, right? It could be from past experience. Maybe they've had a previous experience with this sickness and it getting worse or prolonged when they made wudu. Or they get a medical opinion from a skilled Muslim doctor who is not a fasiq, they're not openly corrupt. So that Muslim is a practicing Muslim, they avoid the major sins publicly, they're upright, and you go to them and they say, yes, this sickness that you have will be prolonged or worsened if you use water for wudu or ghusl, you should therefore use tayammum instead. If you go by that person's opinion, you can make tayammum. Right? So there is some subjectivity to this, but if you have experience with sickness and it being prolonged or worsened due to wudu, you can opt for tayammum. So with those conditions explained, we then describe what tayammum is and how it is done. Tayammum is quite easy. There's some other conditions I forgot to mention. These are kind of secondary ones. If you have wounds also on the rest of your body, on the most of your body, say a person has not just a wound here or a wound there that they could wipe with a bandage, but it's covering a good amount of their body, they can make tayammum instead of wudu. Or if they are afraid of thirst for themselves, for their travel partner, or for their animal, if they're traveling with an animal, whether they're afraid they're going to get thirsty now or later in the trip, they could save the water they have and make tayammum instead. This is actually more common today than you would think. Even with modern technology and indoor plumbing, a lot of the world doesn't have running water, and they have to travel with the water, and especially in desert climates, you have to be very economical in your usage of water. And if you make wudu with that water, there's a risk that you could be out on the road for a very long time and get thirsty, and you now have less water than you had in the beginning. So in that circumstance, you could make tayammum, right? And you'll find, for example, in Mauritania, West Africa, people make a lot of tayammum because it's a very dry desert, Sahara deserts there, and water is scarce in many areas. You know, where we were in the middle of nowhere, there was a well, a small little well, 5 kilometers from our encampment. So even by that, it was far enough to where we could make tayammum on its own. We would get water from there, and it was brown, right? Brown from sediment. You had to filter it, but you could only use it for drinking because it wasn't enough water coming into that well to be using for all these other things. You had to really conserve the water just for survival. So in this encampment in the middle of nowhere, because they would move, it's called the azib, the shuyukh would gather their camels and their tents and graze for a month or two here, then a month or two there, for 9 months out of the year. So you travel with the sheikh and you live, set up your tent and study like this. And yeah, you go weeks, months even, with tayammum for every single prayer. And by the first week of doing this, you just have sand and dust encrusted in every area of your beard and your eyebrows. You know, when I finally returned to the city, it took me 1 hour to get all the dust and sand out of my hair and eyebrows and whatnot. But yeah, in that situation, you can make tayammum. Likewise, lacking a means to take water out of a well. What are you going to do? If there's only water in this well and you don't have a bucket, you can't. You can make tayammum. Likewise, fear of missing the funeral prayer or Eid prayer. Why? Because the funeral prayer is very short, and the time it takes for you to make wudu will cause you to miss the funeral prayer. So because of that narrow prayer, the circumstance allows for you to make tayammum just for that, or for their Eid prayer, again because of the narrowness. Can you make up their Eid prayer? Not in the school of Imam Abu Hanifa. There's no making it up. Can you make up the funeral prayer? There's no making it up. Okay, you're now in the masjid and it's jama'ah for dhuhr, and you know if you go make wudu, the prayer is going to be over. Can you make tayammum for dhuhr? No. Why? Because you can make it up afterwards, right? There is obviously going to be a makeup. You pray on your own. That's not the case for the funeral prayer or for their Eid prayer. So for those two alone, if you come into the masjid and they're lining up for the janazah and you don't have wudu, you could just go outside, do your tayammum, go inside, do the janazah, and you're good. But you can't pray dhuhr with that. You can't pray the other prayers with that. It's just for janazah, just for their Eid prayer. All right? So how do you make tayammum and what do you use? Right? Allah Ta'ala says in the Quran that you make tayammum with sa'idan tayyiba, with pure earth. And this means that tayammum can be performed with any pure substance of the earth as long as it is not malleable and does not turn to ash. So what does malleable mean? It means that it can be transformed through some kinds of change, whether it's fire or whatever. So think of metal. Is metal coming from the earth? Yes. But you can smelt it. You can melt it down. And you can't make tayammum with that kind of substance. A tree grows from the earth, does it not? But when you burn it, it turns to ash. So anything that is malleable like iron, or that can turn to ash like a tree or a bush, even though these things are coming from the earth, you cannot use them for tayammum. But if it's something that would not burn if put to fire, and does not, you can't really mold it, it's not malleable like steel or iron, dirt, you can make tayammum with that. Whether it is clay, whether it is dust from the earth, whether it is, even if it is gravel, whether it is a stone even. Because the stone, if you burnt the stone, if you put it on fire, it's not going to turn to ash, and it's not malleable. So you can make tayammum with a stone, just as you can make tayammum with the surface of the earth, the pure earth. And this means you can use sand, dirt, limestone, stones, dust, and we would even allow for a person to make tayammum with a wall if it was a mud wall, or a wall that had a significant amount of dust from the earth on it that could be wiped off. You could even do it that way. So tayammum is very easy as long as you're using these kinds of substances that are pure and not contaminated with any filth. Some of you have gone to Morocco, and you'll notice in Morocco, elsewhere in North Africa, in many of the masajid, they'll have this large, smooth, pebble-like stone somewhere by a pillar in a corner. You see this in Morocco everywhere, in all of the masajid. What's that for? People who come to Morocco and they see this, they get puzzled. Why are these stones in the mosque? What's going on here? Well, the answer is those are for people who are coming to the masjid who are sick or in other ways unable to make the wudu, and they make the tayammum using that rock. So instead of looking for earth here or there, they just go to the rock and they do the tayammum with it because the stone is from the earth, right? And there are people who even keep those kinds of pebbles in their homes for if they're sick. Because if they're bedridden and they have to make tayammum, it's quite difficult to get out of the bed and go downstairs and go outside and find somewhere on the ground to strike. Instead, they will keep a stone handy so they can do the tayammum in that way. That's perfectly valid. So how do you do it? It's very, very easy, alhamdulillah. You basically make the intention, the niyyah, to remove the status of al-hadath, the ritual impurity. You need an intention for this one, unlike wudu, which doesn't require one. You need an intention because it's an exception to the rule. It's a dispensation, a specific niyyah that you're raising the status of ritual impurity. And then you strike the earth or the object once, and then you wipe the face completely, covering every area that the water should be covering in wudu. So this means that there's going to be some rubbing involved because it's not water. So you're just passing the hands over all of this area of the skin, inside the crevices, everything, just with the hands. That's the first strike. Then you're going to strike the earth or the object a second time, and then wipe the arms up to and including the elbows. Where does the arm start? Starts right here. So that means you're starting from here. So second strike, doesn't have to be violent or rough, just tap it. No? And then from here, the tips, all the way up to and past the elbows. Just rubbing, getting all the crevices, going in between. And once you've done that, you have attained the ritual purity by tayammum that allows you to perform salat. And this gives you tahara by means of tayammum. This is how you do it. It's very simple. You don't have to strike it violently. You don't have to rub dirt on your face or anything like that. You don't have to take dirt into your hand and rub it in. You're just touching lightly. That's it. Or touching the stone, touching an object from the earth. As long as you do it this way, you're fine. And now coming to the final part of this, because the issue of wounds, bandages, and cast. Now, someone had asked about wiping over socks. We're going to cover that next week. We're talking about wounds, bandages, and cast. Remember in the section on tayammum, if we go back, you are allowed to make the tayammum if you have wounds on most of your body. Because if you have wounds on most of your body, it would be a difficulty that may worsen your condition if you use water covering these areas that are wounded. But if you have wounds on the body, but the uninjured limbs are more than the injured limbs, so you have arms, and you have legs, and you have a head. Those are your main areas. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you have 2 wounds, you have less wounds than you have limbs. If you have 3, you have more wounds than you have limbs. It means that if the uninjured limbs are more than the injured limbs, you have to wash the uninjured limbs and wipe the wounded limbs as long as wiping does not hurt them. Let's say you have a laceration on your arm. You have a big cut. Do you have to wipe that area with water as you make wudu? Well, if it's not going to hurt you, yes. If it's not going to make things worse, yes. But if wiping that wound with water is going to worsen it or prolong the healing process, then you can leave that limb. So you're neither washing or wiping. So if you have a laceration on the arm, you wash everything around it, right? But you're skipping over that area, right? You're not wiping over it because that would make it worse. You just leave it, right? That is allowed. But if you have a broken limb or you have a wounded limb and you can't wipe over it or you can't bypass it like that, you have something around it, you have a cast or you have a bandage, you can wipe the cast and you can wipe the bandage. So let's say that laceration is quite large, you need stitches, and you got stitches and you got wrapped up. Now, how do you make wudu? Do you have to unwrap the bandages and wipe over that area? No, you don't. All you have to do is perform your wudu as normal, and when you get to that part, you just wipe over the bandage. Or if it's a cast, you wipe over the cast, and that's good. Even if that bandage was placed on the limb when you didn't have wudu. Because this is not the same thing as the khuf, or the thick socks that block water. Now for the khuf, we'll learn that you have to put them on after you have wudu, right? For them to be valid to wipe over. But this wound that is wrapped, you wipe over the bandage, even if the bandage was put on without you being in a state of wudu. It doesn't matter, you just wipe over this. If that bandage falls off and the limb has not healed, your previous wiping doesn't invalidate it. Meaning, you wipe over it, you made wudu, you wiped over it, you go to pray dhuhr and then it falls off. Does that mean you have to do wudu over again? No. You're fine. So it's ease. It's ease and facilitation for us when we have wounds like that are bandaged or broken limbs that are in cast. Just wipe over it. And the wiping is not with a lot of water, you're just passing the hand over the area, right? And that's it for the wounds, for the cast. So band-aids, people ask about band-aids. What do? If it's a boo-boo and you can tough it out, take off the band-aid. If it's just one of those things, take it off. But if it's a significant cut that's going to cause you pain or prolong the healing process, you can wipe over the band-aid and you're okay. But if it's just a regular cut, you're not going to be harmed by washing that area. You should just do that, right? And that's it, alhamdulillah. Are there any questions about the wounds, bandages, or tayammum, or anything like that? Yes?
When you make tayammum, do the same rules apply when the wudu is broken, or do you have to remake it for each prayer, or do you
Yeah,
get a water source? Do you have to
right. Well, yeah. So these are details within the Maliki school, right? The nature of your question, it's coming from a Maliki paradigm, which is that as a particular rukhsa, it only raises the state of ritual impurity for you to perform that particular prayer and not for the next one, and that it has to be renewed at each time the search for water or the process. That's not the case here. It's allowed. You just keep it, and whatever breaks the wudu would break the tayammum, and the person will make the tayammum again. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
So what if you're in a place like some rural area where obviously every house has water in it, but you don't want to be knocking on every door asking, like you say, how would you do that?
Yeah, this is water that you don't have access to.
Okay.
Yeah. It has to be outdoors, easy access. Yeah. Yes.
Can you make tayammum, for instance, like on the outside wall of the masjid?
This masjid wall consists of bricks. Bricks are from stone, so that would be it'll be no different from using a stone to make tayammum. It's absolutely fine.
But you can't use grass?
Grass can be burnt and turned to ash.
Even though there's dirt underneath.
If you make contact with the dirt beneath it, as you're striking the earth, you've made contact with the dirt, that's fine. Even if there are some obstructions, as long as you're making contact with the earthen substance, other little things here and there aren't blocking that. It doesn't mean that every single inch of the hands has to be covered with the dirt. You just strike the area, even if there's little things here and there, that's fine. Yeah.
So if the dust is on a metal, for example, or metal surface,
Mm-hmm.
but it has quite a significant amount of dust, you can use that as a tayammum source, right?
Yeah, because you're not striking the metal in that case, you're striking the dust on the metal. Yeah, the surface doesn't matter as long as it's pure. Right? If it was impure, you couldn't use it, but yeah. To be honest, you'd probably have to look quite hard to find that kind of dust built up on a surface.
Well, if you're in Pakistan, you can.
Well, yeah, if you're there, yeah.
That's what you're used to.
You could just go to the back windshield of a car, just the mud flaps on the tire. Yeah. Good. Any other questions? Yes.
Not the painted walls, right? Paint that is not.
The what?
When you said walls, the exclusion is the painted walls.
Yeah, well, when we say walls, we mean the wall is a mud wall, so the mud is from the earth, or the wall has such a significant amount of dust from the earth that you can wipe it off. In that case, you're not using the wall per se, but you're making tayammum with the dust that's on the wall. If it was just a plain wall with paint and no dust, you can't make tayammum with that. So you're right. Okay. You had a question, Maqsa?
What's the minimum water requirement, like, as opposed to, for example, if they have just like 250 milligrams of water, and then, like, if it's like good enough for it to make a wudu, so in that case you have to do like to make a wudu, or you can take like
You're talking about
like 250 milligrams for some people is not enough, and for some people it's enough to make wudu. So you don't want to make like halfway through, like if you spend that water and then it didn't clean your feet or.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't know the answer to that one. Now, and I mean, I have the Maliki answer is quite easy, which is that you just do delk. And traditionally in West Africa, when they teach the fiqh of wudu, the sheikh will then have water poured into a teacup and will demonstrate the wudu from beginning to end with just the water in a teacup. Because it's, number one, that's possible. He shows you it's possible. And he's also demonstrating what he already taught you from the wudu. And using the rubbing of the limbs, you just take a little bit of water and you can spread it across a large surface on the body. So if a person is doing that, then even as little as a teacup is enough. Now in the Hanafi school there's a slight difference, because generally it's disliked to make wudu with a minute amount of water like that. They prefer it to be more. But to your question, I don't know the answer, except the Maliki answer, which is that there's a way to do that, which is just to use a minute amount of water and spread it across the body through the process of delk, spreading that moisture. Because the moisture, the water coming in contact with the limbs through that rubbing is enough, as long as you're covering every inch. Yeah. All right, khair inshallah. So next week we have the other issues, in no particular order. Wiping over the socks, najasa, what is najasa, how to remove najasa, menstruation and postnatal bleeding, and the bathroom etiquettes, and then put it all together inshallah. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi.